The memory of that day still burned fresh in my mind. The mahogany-paneled office, the contemptuous look in my father's eyes, the way he didn't even bother to stand up from his leather chair as he destroyed my life's work. "You're fired, Alexandra," he had said, his voice cold as winter steel. "You'll never be good enough to run Morgan Pharmaceuticals." 6 months later, I stood before my full-length mirror, adjusting the lapel of my Tom Ford suit. Tonight was the Annual Pharmaceutical Industry Gala, the biggest event of the year. And I had a surprise for Daddy Dearest. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. "Everything's ready, Ms. Blake. The press release goes live at 9 p.m. sharp." I smiled, remembering how this all began. After that day in my father's office, I'd done something he never expected. I'd called Jerome Wilson, CEO of Wilson Biotech, Morgan Pharmaceuticals' biggest competitor. "Your research on the new cancer drug," I told him. "I know why it's failing trials." He'd laughed at first. But 2 weeks later, when I showed him exactly what his research team had missed, he wasn't laughing anymore. He was offering me a job. What my father never understood was that I hadn't spent 15 years in his company just following orders. I'd been learning, watching, analyzing. I knew every strength, every weakness, every secret that Morgan Pharmaceuticals tried to hide. The car pulled up to the Grand Meridian Hotel. Camera flashes exploded as soon as I stepped out. The reporters weren't here for me, not yet. They were capturing the usual parade of industry giants. "Miss Blake." A young valet rushed forward. "Mr. Wilson asked me to escort you directly to the main hall." Inside, the ballroom was a sea of expensive suits and designer dresses. I spotted my father immediately, holding court near the center of the room, my older brother Thomas at his side. They were probably bragging about their latest acquisition, a small research facility in Boston. If they only knew I'd let them have that facility because its patents were about to expire. "Alexandra." A familiar voice made me turn. It was Sarah, my former assistant at Morgan Pharmaceuticals. I didn't expect to see you here." "Things change," I smiled, noting how her eyes widened at my confident demeanor. She'd been there that day watching as security escorted me out of the building. "Your father's been telling everyone you had a nervous breakdown," she whispered. "That you couldn't handle the pressure." "Has he now?" I checked my watch. 8:55 p.m. "Well, Sarah, in about 5 minutes he'll have a very different story to tell." I made my way through the crowd, accepting glasses of champagne from passing waiters but never drinking. I needed a clear head for what was coming. Jerome Wilson spotted me and nodded slightly. The old man had been a perfect partner in this venture, ready to step down and let new blood take over. He understood something my father never did. Adaptation is survival. 8:59 p.m. My father's booming laugh echoed across the room. "Of course Morgan Pharmaceuticals will be leading the merger discussions. We've been the industry leader for 30 years. I pulled out my phone, watching the seconds tick by. In the corner of my eye, I saw reporters checking their phones, their expressions changing from bored to shocked. 9 p.m. The breaking news alert hit everyone's phones simultaneously. The headline read, "Wilson Biotech announces new CEO, Alexandra Blake to lead $12 billion company." The room fell silent. My father's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, crashing to the floor. Thomas grabbed his phone, frantically scrolling through the news. I stepped into the center of the room, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Every head turned, every eye fixed on me. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "I believe some introductions are in order." The silence in the ballroom was electric. My father's face had drained of all color, while Thomas kept looking between his phone and me as if he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. "Alexandra," my father finally managed, his voice hoarse. "What is the meaning of this?" Before I could answer, Jerome Wilson stepped forward, placing a paternal hand on my shoulder. "Allow me to make this official," he announced to the room. "As of today, I'm stepping down as CEO of Wilson Biotech. Alexandra Blake will be taking full control of operations, effective immediately." The room erupted in whispers. Phones were frantically recording every moment, every reaction. I could practically see the social media posts writing themselves. "This is impossible," Thomas sputtered. "She's been gone for 6 months. She can't possibly." "Can't possibly what, brother?" I cut in smoothly. "Can't possibly understand the industry? Can't possibly lead a major corporation. I pulled out my tablet. Shall we discuss the R37 project? Thomas's face went white. The R37 project was Morgan Pharmaceuticals' secret weapon, a revolutionary arthritis drug they'd been developing. How do you know about? He started. About how the latest trials showed liver complications? I finished for him. Or about how you've been hiding those results from the FDA. My father stepped forward, his business mask firmly in place. Alexandra, whatever game you're playing. This is no game, Jerome interrupted. Your daughter has revolutionized our research department in just 6 months. The cancer drug we were struggling with? She solved it in 2 weeks. More whispers rippled through the crowd. That drug had been the talk of the industry, Wilson Biotech's potential breakthrough that had mysteriously stalled. But more importantly, I added, we've just acquired Nexus Pharmaceuticals. The room went completely still. Nexus was the third largest pharmaceutical company in the country, and Morgan Pharmaceuticals had been trying to buy them for years. That's not possible, my father growled. We've been in negotiations with Nexus for months. Were you? I smiled, pulling up another document on my tablet. Strange because they signed with us last week. Would you like to see the contract? Thomas grabbed father's arm. Dad, this means they now control 35% of the market, I finished. Making Wilson Biotech the largest pharmaceutical company in the country. I paused, letting that sink in. Or should I say, making us your biggest competitor. The reporters who had been hovering at the edges of the room suddenly surged forward, questions flying. Ms. Blake, how did you engineer this takeover? Mr. Wilson, why choose Alexandra Blake as your successor? What does this mean for Morgan Pharmaceuticals? I held up a hand, silencing the room. All excellent questions. But first, I believe my father was just telling everyone about leading merger discussions. I turned to face him directly. Would you like to revise that statement? His face had turned from pale to red, a vein pulsing in his temple. The same look he'd had when he fired me. You think this makes you powerful? He hissed, low enough that only those closest could hear. You think you can just walk in here and... Actually, Dad, I cut him off. I just did. And tomorrow morning when the markets open, everyone will see exactly how powerful I've become. The tension in the room was palpable as I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small USB drive. The same one I'd taken from my office the day I was fired. My father's eyes fixed on it, recognition dawning on his face. You remember this, don't you, Dad? I held it up. The drive you accused me of stealing company secrets with? Well, you were half right. I wasn't stealing secrets, I was collecting evidence. Jerome Wilson stepped forward again. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention. There's more to tonight's announcement. The reporters' cameras flashed frantically as he continued. Wilson Biotech isn't just acquiring Nexus Pharmaceuticals. We're also launching a new division focused on ethical pharmaceutical development and pricing. My father's facade cracked. You wouldn't dare. The Blake Initiative, I announced clearly, watching my father and brother exchange panicked looks. Named after my mother, who died because she couldn't afford the cancer medication that Morgan Pharmaceuticals marked up 3,000%. The room went deadly quiet. Even the reporters stopped taking notes, sensing the weight of the moment. That's right, I continued, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. The same medication that cost $3 to produce but was sold for $9,000 per dose. The medication that could have saved her, if her own husband's company hadn't prioritized profit over people. Thomas stepped forward. Alex, you can't just... Can't just what? Tell the truth. I turned to the gathered crowd. The Blake Initiative will ensure that life-saving medications are accessible to everyone who needs them. We're starting with cancer treatments, then expanding to other critical medications. The reporters exploded with questions again, but I kept my eyes fixed on my father. His carefully constructed world was crumbling and he knew it. You'll destroy the industry, he growled. No, Dad. I'm going to fix it. I nodded to Jerome, who pressed a button on his phone. The large screens around the ballroom came to life, displaying internal Morgan Pharmaceuticals documents, pricing strategies, hidden trial results, buried safety reports. Everything on these screens has already been sent to the FDA and ICE, I announced. Along with detailed documentation of every illegal markup, Every hidden trial failure, every suppressed safety concern for the past decade. My father lunged forward, but security, my security, stepped between us. You ungrateful little. Careful, Dad, I cut him off. The cameras are rolling and your shareholders are watching. As if on cue, his phone began ringing. Mine too. And Thomas's. The news was spreading and the market was already reacting in after-hours trading. Miss Blake, a reporter called out. What do you say to those who claim this is just revenge? I smiled, straightening my jacket. This isn't about revenge. It's about responsibility. About doing what's right. Something I learned not from my father but from my mother. I turned back to my father, who looked suddenly old and defeated. You were right about one thing, Dad. I wasn't good enough to run Morgan Pharmaceuticals. I was better. The room erupted in chaos as more phones started ringing. Morgan Pharmaceuticals stock was plummeting. Wilson Biotech's was soaring. And somewhere I knew my mother was smiling. Now, if you'll excuse me, I addressed the room, I have a company to run. And lives to save. As I walked toward the exit, flanked by my executive team, I heard Jerome addressing the press. The Blake Initiative will launch next month. We expect it to revolutionize the industry. I paused at the door, looking back one last time. My father stood alone in the center of the room, his empire crumbling around him. Thomas was already on the phone, probably with their lawyers. But I wasn't worried. I had something they never did, a purpose beyond profit. My phone buzzed with a message from my assistant. Your mother's foundation is ready to launch alongside the initiative. I smiled, stepping into the cool night air. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be and then using that power to help others. As my car pulled up, I heard one last question from a reporter. Ms. Blake, what's your message to young women in the industry? I turned, knowing my answer would make headlines tomorrow. Never let anyone tell you you're not good enough. And when they try to stop you, don't get even, get better. The car door closed behind me, shutting out the chaos. Tomorrow the real work would begin. But tonight I had finally proven what I'd known all along. Sometimes being banned from the family business is the best thing that can happen to you. Because it forces you to build something better.